Hey, how's it going guys? It's Tom Mason here, back with another video, and today we're doing a quick Q&A all about what I've been up to, wildlife photography, and a load of topics that people have been asking over on Instagram. I put the feelers out a couple of days ago for some questions that people wanted to answer, so I've got them on my iPad here. I'm going to run through them, shoot you some answers, and talk through some different topics that I've been asked about. If you're new to the channel, I'm Tom. I'm a professional wildlife photographer from the UK, and here we talk about wildlife photography gear, take you behind the scenes on trips and shoots that I'm doing, and just show you how I create images out in the field and give you some ideas and tips for your own shooting. So if that sounds like the sort of thing that you're into, be sure to like and subscribe for future videos and check out a load of my other stuff, because I'm sure you'll find some interesting content there, and there's lots of videos coming up over the next couple of months that I'm really excited about. I'm really kind of happy to be back in front of the camera shooting some YouTube videos, so yeah, hang tight for a lot of those. But let's dive back into the Q&A. So let's get started with what shots and species are you currently going after? Well, having moved to Cornwall about a year ago, I'm in a bit of a transitional period at the moment where I'm looking for different habitats and locations for certain subjects. I'm exploring with my binoculars, grabbing those, heading out on long hikes, just looking for locations that might work for, projects in the future. I'm still working on some of my older projects and long-term stuff, photographing brown hares in the UK. I've been doing some work with foxes over the last couple of years as well that I've been continuing at the start of this year. So that's all keeping me busy. I'm always in contact with people finding new locations for hares to build out the portfolio, so that's constantly on the back burner. But right now I'm looking for some like peregrine spots and stuff like that here on the coast of Cornwall that would be really fun to get out and shoot. I've also been away on a couple of trips this year, photographing Arctic foxes with David Gibbon in Iceland. That was really great, and there's some videos coming up about that soon. And then I've just got back from Svalbard photographing Arctic wildlife again. Really exciting trip with Ocean Wire. Videos to come, so stay tuned for them. They'll be coming shortly. But yes, that's what I've been up to making pictures of. I'm still working on some camera trap projects that have just been taking forever and haven't been working very well, but I'm sure I'll talk about that in the future. But yeah, that's what I've been currently going after the last few months. Right, so next says Laura Puppy. Now, I will just say that Laura is a fantastic wildlife photographer, one of the Nikon creators who I was working with at the Bird Fair about a month ago or so. She works up on the Isle of Mull with her husband George. They run tours and really great stuff, so I'll put all the details down to them below. But she says puppy, yes. So for, well, what is it now? 4 months, I've had a beautiful new Cocker Spaniel in my life. Our puppy called Addie. She is brilliant. I love her. I've spent so much time with her and my girlfriend walking and enjoying a bit of time off. She has taken up a huge amount of my life that I don't regret at all. It's just been brilliant. She is the best. You'll see lots of her over the coming years as I probably use her for autofocus testing on cameras and all sorts of stuff like that. But she's brilliant. I love her. And yeah, puppy is perfect. Yeah, just brilliant. She's wicked. Lovely ears and all that stuff. Just great. Right, moving on. Talk about DSLRs and are they still an option in 2024? Well, yeah, of course they are. A lot of people ask me about this, like, are DSLRs dead? No. I mean, they're probably dead in the terms of like, will people create new DSLRs in the next few years? And Nikon going to bring out a new DSLR? Probably not, because the mirrorless technology that we've got now allows options for shooting that aren't possible with a DSLR. But does that mean that for the general population, the DSLR is dead as a photographic tool? No. There are so many professionals still shooting DSLRs. If images are your primary focus, then mirrorless, yes, it has benefits, but it's not going to kind of majorly change necessarily every person's opportunity to shoot. My D850, D5 would still be doing the job that my Z9 and Z8 would be doing for stills. They were workhorse tools that were brilliant for professionals all around the world. And just because mirrorless cameras have come along now, they're not dead in the water. You could have a D850 now and be shooting some of the best work in the world. It really wouldn't be a problem. It's skill level that's going to kind of improve your ability to shoot with those tools. And I know hundreds of photographers who are still very, very happy with their DSLRs. So yeah, they're totally great. And they're incredible value at the moment. Like, you can buy a D850 along with like a 200 to 400 f4, 500 f4, even a 600 f4 back in the F mount, and still have a great amount of change to just get out and go on some wildlife photography trips. So if you're not necessarily in the requirement for the video stuff, that's one of the major reasons I moved to mirrorless for my professional work, the DSLR is still kicking, and it will be until pretty much the D850 dies, that you're going to shoot a lot of pictures on before that happens. But yeah, they're still incredible. They're abundant. You know, if you're starting off in wildlife photography and your budget isn't a massive chunk, then the DSLR is definitely the way you'd go in order to get the best value for your money. I'll be talking about that soon. But yeah, the DSLR is certainly not dead for the wildlife photographer just yet. If you could pick one camera and one lens, what would it be? Now, to be honest, I've got my head and my heart here. Heart says my 300 2.8 and the Z9. That's what I pick. It's brilliant. The 300 2.8 is one of my favorite lenses of all time. It's produced some of my favorite images. I absolutely love it. It was the lens I bought when I was 18, and it has stuck with me my entire professional career, and you'll prize it from my hands to get it off me, my dead hands, to be honest, because I just love it that much. So yeah, that would be my heart, but my head, for how I shoot and what I shoot now, I'd probably pick a 24-70 2.8, just because the flexibility to shoot everything from wide storytelling images to portraits at 70mm. A bit harder to do wildlife portraits with a 24-70, but a lot of the time I do remote work, you know, camera trap sort of stuff, and you could definitely use it for that. And for where I'm going with my photography, I think a 24-70 would fulfill most of what I needed, but you're not going to take my 300 2.8 off me. That's just not going to happen. So yeah, I'm probably not going to ever have to pick one camera and one lens, but yeah, it'd be a 24-70 and a Z9. What Z Tele would I recommend as an all-rounder? There's kind of two that I'd pick here. It'd be either the 180-600, the 6.3, or the 400 4.5. And we're talking like a budget level here, like a reasonable budget level. The 180-600, very flexible, whether you're doing mammals, birds, you know, you've got the ability to zoom. It's great for video as well as stills. The internal focus, the price point that it's at, exceptional. It's going to give someone who's getting into wildlife photography a lot of scope to shoot multiple subjects and work out what they love to do. One area where the 180-600 might not be perfect is for those backgrounds, and that's why my other choice would be the 400 4.5. I think it's a greatly positioned lens for the fact that you've got that wider aperture. It's going to work in low light performance. It's, you know, small build, easy to carry everywhere. The sharpness, the performance is absolutely excellent. I've got a review of it on the channel. Absolutely love that lens. And again, if I didn't own a 300 2.8, then I probably would add that to the kit. I think it's a really brilliant lens at a great price point, and for carrying around all day and shooting a variety of wildlife, the 400 4.5 is a great choice as well. So 180-600, 400 4.5, very great lenses. Either would be a really good choice for your wildlife photography in the Z mount. So yeah. Next up, 400 2.8 or 600 f4. Well, you'll see behind me I have a 600 f4, and the reason I chose the 600 f4 as my Z mount telephoto to start with is because I already own a 300 2.8. We're going to talk about the 300 2.8 a lot in this video based on questions, but yeah, because I have a 300 2.8, the 400 2.8 didn't make much sense for me to have. The 600 f4 gives me longer reach. It gives me scope to shoot a different style of image than I get from the 300. For birds, for smaller stuff where I just can't get as near, the 600 is a great tool for that. But if I had to pick one and I could only own one, and I didn't own a 300 2.8, the 400 2.8 would probably make a bit more sense due to the fact that you've got that wide open aperture for low light shooting. With the built-in teleconverter, obviously you've got 560 f4, that's nearly a 600 f4. You can use the 2x teleconverter on the 400 2.8 and still only be at 5.6 at 800mm. That's really good as well. So as an all-round lens, the 400 2.8 is probably the choice most people would go for. I mean, they're both optically superb, incredible lenses, and that's why so many people and so many wildlife photographers these days own a 400 2.8. And that would be the big reason I wouldn't choose it, because it's a little bit boring and I'd rather be a bit different. And so the 600 f4 and the 300 2.8 are what I choose. And I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, massively praying we get a 300 2.8 TC. Would be wicked in the Z mount, but yeah. We can all dream, right? Please, Nikon. Right, next question that kind of leads into that. Photography with the 300 2.8 in 2024. I still use my 300 2.8 all the time. It's one of my favorite lenses of all time. It's brilliant. The image quality, the backgrounds, it just is such a superb lens. I absolutely love it. it's cheap nowadays as well. Like you can buy them secondhand for like 1,500 quid, 1,800 quid, mint condition. Superb for low light shooting, for mammals where you're working handheld. It's the lens I pick all the time. I absolutely love it. On the Z9, it's just superb. The autofocus is faster than I think it's ever been. So yeah, I've been shooting in Svalbard with it recently. I actually took it alongside the 600. The reason for that is when I went to Churchill like last year, I didn't take my 300 2.8, completely regretted it, but this time I wasn't going to do that. So I took both. That was obviously a lot heavier, but I absolutely loved having it with me. And yeah, it's just such a great tool. And if you ever have the chance to shoot the 300 2.8 and you don't fall in love with it, I don't know what's wrong with you, really. I just don't know what's wrong with you. What are my long-term thoughts on the 800 PF and its place in the Z system? The 800 PF is an incredible lens for quite a niche. The niche is that you want to get close to subjects that you can't get that near to, you want great amount of reach, and you want a lightweight option. That's the niche. The reason it's niche is because for many people who are getting into wildlife photography, I don't think it's the tool that they necessarily want. They might think they do because obviously the extended reach is really great for getting you close to subjects, but some of the kind of workarounds that make the 800 PF, the kind of long close focus, that means you don't get as close to subjects as you think you might do, the 6.3 aperture at an 800mm can be quite restrictive if you work in darker locations like the UK. Yeah, that can be a bit of a problem. But if you're someone who wants extended reach, say you're out on safari and you want to create like really detailed straight in shots and you've got loads of light, maybe you're looking for snow leopards in places where you just can't get near them, or you're focused a lot of the time on small birds that are at a reasonable distance, the 800 PF is an incredible tool for that. And there's no other system other than the Z system that has that. And the fact that it's basically a third of the price of the 600 f4, it's a no-brainer for some people. But if you're getting into wildlife photography and you're thinking that's the tool I'm going to go for because it's got the most reach, the most millimeters, I would probably hold back on it, go for something more 500, 600, see how you feel with that before you go and add the 800 to the gear. I loved trying it out. I was very lucky that I got to test it out as one of the first people in the world for Nikon. I think it's a superb option. It's certainly a lens that I will borrow off Nikon for certain shoots in the future where I need to be light, but I need the reach. But for me, in current times of like a daily driver, it's not the lens that I would use all the time. But then again, of course, I also have a 600 f4 where the teleconverter gives me 850mm at a faster aperture than the PF version. So it's not something I really need. But I know I'm in a very fortunate position to have that. But if you do want the 800mm reach, lower price point, and you know that's what you want, well, it's just such a great lens. The image quality is great, yeah, beautiful, lightweight, perfect. It's a niche that Sony, Canon, everyone like that doesn't have, so absolute win for the Z mount. I mean, we are completely kind of so lucky with all the telephoto options we have for Nikon shooters in the Z mount. Is incredible, yeah. But that's kind of my thoughts on the 800 PF. It's a little bit niche, but if you know you need it, it's a great tool for the job. Right, so next up, how to get creative with shutter speeds. Now, this is a really interesting one because I think a lot of the time people focus, when it comes to wildlife photography, on ultra fast shutter speeds, freezing motion, locking that shot, and making sure everything's totally sharp. And that's great, it works a lot of the time, but it does get a little bit boring. I really like to add motion into my images, to add movement. And that means that I'm going to drop my ISO down to 200, all the way down to 64 sometimes. That's going to, of course, mean that my camera is less sensitive to light. That means those shutter speeds drop, and that means I can start to add some movement. A lot of the time I'm pushing the aperture to f8, f11, and then a shutter speed of 1/20th, and starting around there, start getting a bit of movement into the frame. Now, if you want to practice this, how do you start? Well, firstly, don't do it on really important shoot days. If you're going out and photographing something for the first time, you're really excited to see it, it's probably not the chance and the opportunity to experiment with this. I would go to like a seabird cliff or somewhere where there's loads of movement and subjects running around, you know, a deer park, somewhere where you can go time and time again. It doesn't really matter if you miss some shots, and that's where you're going to experiment. Then dial that shutter speed in like a 20th to start with and just get a feel for how that looks. You know, of course, a lot of this is going to depend on the sort of image that you want. You know, that kind of classic panning image is a really great fun one to practice. You know, birds diving through, you're dragging the camera with them, you're getting loads of movement in the background, but the subject's reasonably sharp. That's a great one to start with. But next up, you might want to add movement where you're keeping the camera very still and letting the subjects do the movement. This is something I've experimented with, like waders on the coast, even like elephants as well. You're kind of locking off and letting them move in the frame. It just adds a little life to it that's really quite cool. Again, it's all about experimentation, taking the time to just dial these settings into the camera and practice. It's not something I can say, put this setting in, do this, and you'll get it right every time. You just need to start with subjects that aren't a massive risk and start playing with it and seeing how it goes. And a lot of the time, the best time to do it is, when you've been out on a shoot, you've been shooting images, the light's been brilliant, everything, it starts to dip, and you're like, oh, I'm going to have to start putting the ISO up now to like 1600, 3200, 6400. It's getting a little bit grainy, but I'm still only at like, 150th of a second. Don't do that. Go the other way. Start dropping the ISO and allowing the shutter speed to drop and adding that intentional camera movement. The likelihood is, if you're pushing the ISO to 10,000, you're not going to get a great shot, but having some movement and having a practice with that is going to teach you a skill that's far more useful to make interesting wildlife photography than just getting a really grainy, semi-sharp picture of a subject that doesn't really matter. That's how I do it anyway. Right, so how do you find your editing style is the next question. Bit of a hard one for me because I don't know if I have an editing style, but I do have an editing kind of process mantra sort of thing. I want my edits to look natural. I don't want to look at frames and think to myself, God, that doesn't look realistic at all. Sometimes you go for Instagram, you see these like super bright, oversaturated images. I don't want any of that. I want to think to myself like, yeah, that's how it looks. Great, that's how I want it to be. Of course, you have contrast and natural lighting and shadow in images, and you want to accentuate that and get the most out of that your kind of image. But in terms of like, if I look at a shot on the monitor and think, well, I can see the edit on that, I've gone too far, and I called that my editing style. Now, of course, sometimes I push and I do like edits in black and white and stuff like that, but it really depends on the images and the portfolio that I'm working on. That's how I feel about it. But to actually find your editing style, I think it just comes down to what you like. If you like images to look a certain way, then that's completely fine. Edit them like that. But I think you will find if you push too hard into certain styles, you will come back to them in the future and maybe not regret it, but think, oh, I'd do that a bit differently these days. And it's why it's always a good practice to re-edit files that you took quite a few years ago and just reprocess them from time to time. You'll find that you've learned new techniques, you've got different skills, maybe you've picked up a few tips about Lightroom, Photoshop, and you're doing things a little bit of a different way, and you'll see that your editing comes on as time goes on. I think that's the way to develop your style. The same as when you've actually got the camera in the hand. It's just a learning process over a long period of time, but just don't rush it. And don't always get caught into fads, because they'll die off, and Instagram, styles and stuff like that won't be around forever. So just edit in a way that you like, you feel comfortable with, and what makes you happy. And of course, print the odd picture, because I think that really helps you know if the final edit was the way you'd like to see it printed in a book. It's always a good one to go back to. Right, so another question that kind of had two parts was, how has your kit changed with the Z mount? Now, I'm not really going to answer this right now because I'll do a complete video on what's in my camera bag, like 2024, going into 2025, that sort of stuff, all about this sort of gear, so we'll miss that. But the other question, part of this is like, what's my philosophy on a big trip to a new location, and how do I approach that? I really want to talk about this because when I go on a trip, and you're going to see a couple of trips coming up with the Iceland and the Svalbard trip, I'm going to a location I've never visited before. Yes, I know what subject I'm going after, be it like Arctic foxes, polar bears, whatever. But in terms of actually getting the shots, you don't have a defined idea of what they're going to be. As a portrait photographer, and I know the model I'm bringing and stuff like that, and great, you can kind of make plans for that. But as a wildlife photographer, you've got to react to what's in front of you. And that's great, because it does mean straight away, you're probably not going to get the same pictures as anyone else. That's excellent. Because in my view, if I go on a trip and come back with the same pictures that other people have taken, wasn't really worth the trip. And I honestly mean that, because sometimes I see landscape photographers and they just go to the same location and they might as well just like put marks where the tripod's supposed to go, and they all shoot the same picture. And the guy who did it first, like, got a really interesting, unique shot, but all the ones who came after that might have got it in slightly worse lighting, not the great time, wrong time of year, etc. And it never replaces that originality of the first shot. But luckily, when it comes to wildlife photography, we don't have to worry about that as much, because of course the wildlife's always moving, and that means we realistically always going to get a different shot. But in terms of the style, I look at a great amount of photography before I go on any trip. I'll take in images not only from professionals who have been to an area before, just general tourists who have been to an area. I'll look at Google Earth images, the location, see where the light might be. And then once I've got a little bit of a plan of the styles and images I want to take, I might want some movement, I might want panoramics, I might etc, and I'll write them all down. I'll then let that kind of digest for a few weeks before I go on the trip. I'll have a look at it, maybe on the plane. But when I get there, I just start to watch. Pick my binoculars up, start looking around, and just get an idea of, what am I being drawn to on this trip? I try to keep quite a loose idea of what I want to come back with. But when I am working on a trip, what I tend to do is when I start to get shooting, I look at the images as I go and see if we're building out any sort of portfolio or kind of cohesiveness within the images, because that certainly helps when you kind of come back from a trip. But one thing I will say is I'm the ever optimist on every trip. I'm always saying and joking with people, it's going to be fantastic when the walrus comes up next to the polar bear, etc., and all that sort of stuff. And people think that I'm kind of, just being ridiculous. But actually, a lot of the time, that over-optimism really helps you kind of stay in focus on the trip the whole time, constantly looking for that next picture. And of course, be prepared that you can make an entire trip's worth of images in 2 hours. And I've happened before, gone on a trip, shot absolutely nothing for basically the whole time, and then had a 2-hour session with wildlife that's produced all of the best images of an entire trip. So you've got to be constantly focused and ready to make the most of any image opportunity. It might happen on day 1, it might happen on day 10, but when it does come up, you just shoot it, and get those shots. And when you're in that moment, all that prep that you've done beforehand of looking through hundreds and thousands of pictures, thinking of different ideas, compositional techniques, etc., that's going to come into play, and you're going to shoot a range of different shots in that small time window that's going to be super important for coming back from a trip with images that you're really happy with. So that tends to be my philosophy on a trip. I do a lot of research, but I give myself a lot of creative scope to lean into what I'm interested in, and then I make the time consistently optimistic about that I'm going to nail it, and then I go really hard in when the opportunity presents itself, and I make all of the different pictures I want. And of course, if you keep doing that day after day after day after day on a trip, you'll come home with images you're happy about. So next up, kind of lead on from this, tips for your first African safari. First one, well, join me in Botswana. I'm heading back next year. There's a few places. If you want to join me, I'll drop links below so you can join the trip. But joking aside, firstly, have 2 cameras with you all the time. I mean, it's always good to have 2 cameras on any trip anyway, but on safari, I think having one on the long telephoto and one on the wide, really useful, because that quick switching when action's happening is really important. Of course, then you're not taking lenses off and getting loads of dust exposed. It's really important too. Moving on from that, I'd say, try not to change lenses and always be using your dust blower at the end of every night to get rid of any of that dust. Explain to your guide first about what you're looking for, where you'd like to be positioned and things like that. Don't go for high number of species. Tell them that, say that you're looking for the best photographic opportunities and not to kind of trail around getting loads of different shots of animals. It's far better to spend time with 1 or 2 certain subjects to create those shots rather than trailing, driving all the time going, oh look, there's a leopard, there's a cheetah, whatever. Spend time in single locations and develop portfolios around that. Next up, I'd say utilize your low ISOs and add that in-camera movement that we've already talked about. It's something that people tend to miss out on these sort of shoots, but late in the evening or in the midday when the light isn't as flattering, you can drop the ISO all the way down to like low 2, use a half a second, kind of blur out, remove some of that harsh contrast and make interesting shots. That's going to be where you kind of add that little finishing touch to the portfolio of like simple, more kind of classic shots that you've already been working on, and certainly worth doing. And next would always be to find the lowest angles. Check your Jeep out, Jeep, boat, whatever you're moving in. See where's the lowest point I can shoot from. Is there any gaps I can shoot through? If we talk to the driver, can we position the vehicle so we're a bit lower? Ask those sort of questions. That's going to make it a far better opportunity to actually make images out on location rather than just hoping that you're going to be in a good place. But generally a lot of the time you're shooting down, so you always want to be looking for the lowest angle you can get and shoot like that. Finally, would be to shoot details. You know, if you're out on safari, so many people are always shooting like the full animal, everything like that. If you're nice and close in on the details, you know, the fur, the textures in birds' feathers, looking for the like stripes or just all that sort of stuff. Focus in on details, get those really tight crops. They really help increase the interest in a portfolio and something certainly more interesting to look at than just another head of a buffalo. Get low, use 2 cameras, make sure you explain to your guide what you're looking for, and shoot not only the low ISOs and the movement, but also looking for details. That sort of stuff really help you out. How often do you come back empty-handed? All the time. I've come back empty-handed from wildlife photography shoots more than I come back with memory cards and memory cards full of images. If you're going after specific styles of pictures, more interesting frames, you're going to increase the regularity that you come back with no pictures. It just happens. And with time as a wildlife photographer, what you'll also do is when you're first getting started, you'll shoot loads of images anyway, because you'll be like, oh, there's a bird sitting there, that's really great. Nowadays, I won't even bother taking that picture. That's because I know that it's not going to be the frame that I use, and it's really just a waste of memory on my computer. So I'm far more picky about the images I make nowadays. That means more regularly I come back empty-handed. Now, of course, on big shoots, I very rarely come back with no pictures whatsoever. Have to be a really bad time for all the prep and the planning and everything to completely come back with nothing. But when I'm out in the UK working on camera trap projects or more like remote images or looking for very specific styles of shot I want, I come back empty-handed all the time, and it's completely normal. If you came back with shots every single time, to be honest, it would be a little bit boring and too easy. So I'm quite happy that I regularly come back with nothing. So there you go. That's a pretty good place, I think, to end the Q&A. Hope that was helpful. I hope there was a few topics that were interesting to explore. I'm sure we'll do another one of these in the future. So if you've ever got any questions, drop them to me over on Instagram. More than happy to answer them. And I'll more than probably keep some of the best ones back for a future one of these. If you do fancy joining me on a trip to Botswana, future trips to the Arctic, places like that, be sure to check down below. I'll drop the links to my tours as well as my newsletter, where you'll find out all of the information about how to get on a trip with me, future workshops, all that sort of stuff. If you haven't subscribed already, please get down there, drop it a like and subscribe. Love to have you here for more videos. But until the next one, guys, get out there, grab your camera, and go enjoy some wildlife photography. And I'll see you soon.